If you are a citizen in Greenville, your taxes will be increased 2 cents. That vote came by the Greenville City Council, 2 separate votes. I believe both motions were made by Calvin Mercer, and Calvin, it's become a little bit of a bone of contention with some folks who say that Greenville really did not have to raise taxes. And there's been an email chain going back and forth, and there's been a lot of discussion about that. So here to talk about that is the man himself, the man, the myth, the legend, the Greenville City Councilman at Large, Calvin Mercer. Good morning, Calvin. How are you?
Good morning, Henry. Thanks
Good
for
to
having
see
me
you. You
on.
doing okay?
Yeah, I'm doing
Having a good
doing
summer?
well. Yeah, busy, but
Yeah.
I'm doing well. Yeah.
Let's start with the process. You've been criticized for the way that the tax increase was handled. In years past, I believe the last budget period that had gone on, I've been told this by 2 or 3 folks, you brought in every department head, let them kind of present what they needed, talked about it on an individual budget level for each individual department. And as a result of that, there were a lot of discussions that took place that, the city council negotiating with some of the department heads in the city, they found ways around having to raise taxes. This time around, at your suggestion, you decided not to do that, but no one was really aware that this tax increase was coming, and then all of a sudden, boom, a 1-cent tax increase. Then there was some changes that the state legislature brought forth, and you came back a couple of weeks later and added another 1 cent to it. So why not use the same process? I know the mayor wanted to do that. Some of the other council people wanted to do that, but you now have the 4-voting block that you complained about that everybody else had, that you were on the bottom of for all those years. Why not bring in the department heads and listen to whether or not they really need the things? Because that's the heart of the matter is, what's the nuts and bolts in each individual department.
Well, Henry, thanks for having me on. You used the word myth earlier. We've heard a lot about that budget process, so where we brought the department heads in and then we all tightened our belts and lowered taxes and so on. And I voted to lower the taxes right at 4 cents. But I did that saying we would have to actually control spending. Well, we didn't do that. The auditor said, the myth is that we tightened our belts. Well, we didn't. The auditor said in 2013 that revenues were down 5%, fund balance was down 3%, and expenses were up 1%. We did not tighten our belt. And the auditor went on to say, you cannot continue to see decreases in the fund balance. So basically what happened is we didn't tighten our belts. We were living off savings that previous councils have put together.
Well, was the directive from the city council to the department heads to tighten their belts? I mean, it seems like then that there might have been someone dropped the ball on holding their feet to the fire on that.
Well, I was actually that budget process. There was a subcommittee of the council put together. I disagree with this. I thought every council member needed to have, we need all hands on deck to take a look at that. But there was a subcommittee, and there were meetings that were not always at a time I could attend. So, I was a part of the council, so I take responsibility for being a part of the council through that process. But I did not agree with some of the process, and I certainly.
Well, you're talking about process. My question is, let's just say in business, I'm in charge of a business. If my department heads come in and I say I need you to tighten your belts, and then I find out a year later we didn't tighten our belts, my response is not going to be, well, I guess I need more revenue. It's going to be, go back and do what I told you to do, tighten your belts.
Well, I voted against a $64,000, a quote-unquote efficiency study. I voted against the river study. I'm all for the river, better access and better utilization of the river, but I don't think we needed a nearly $200,000 study to get what might come out of that. So I think I did my role to try to rein in spending, but after 2 years of not doing that, basically, then this council was faced with balancing a budget. And the night that we had to do that, there was talk of economic development and growing our way out of it and so on. But you can't use economic development to grow your way into a balanced budget in 30 minutes. I mean, for legal and fiscally prudent reasons, we needed to balance the budget. And it was a hard call.
But again, what I hear you saying is that there has not been a tightening of the budget, a tightening of the belt, as we talked about.
Well, I voted against some of those studies. I've done my part, but I was not in the majority of the council for the 2 years that the auditor said our expenses went up.
Well, we're
1%.
talking about this year. We're talking about the issue being that, you're saying you're going back and blaming the previous council, but they said to the department heads tighten the belt. You guys came back this year and said, well, the belt wasn't tightened, so let's raise taxes. I mean, that's what I think that's what the citizens are hearing you say.
Well, you want a perspective on this, is that in 2012, and I voted for this, we essentially lowered taxes right at 4 cents. And so we're operating at, I think, 2.1 million less per year. And so that has basically caught up with us. I think that we have this last year, I mean, the audit report's being done now. We'll see what this year looks like. But we have, Manager Lipscomb has gone in and cut budgets. But again, when you're looking at 2.1 million, that simply could not be made up with cuts. Now, I'll put this out there, is that on the night that we needed to make this decision, no one on the council who voted against this tax adjustment came up with any specific plan to balance the budget, other than just kind of, let's grow our way out of it. But we had to balance the budget, that night. So I think it was a tough call.
I'm not quite sure I understand why it had to be done that night. I mean, explain what you mean by that. Because there was 1 cent tax increase, then you came back, 2 weeks later and added another 1 cent tax increase. If what I hear, it's almost, you're almost saying, I think that, you guys were caught by surprise by this, but yet you didn't want to have the department heads come in and tell you anything. So maybe you were caught by surprise because there hadn't been enough homework done. If you're saying that you found out in one meeting that you had to increase taxes or find a way out of the budget, I mean, what kind of planning is that?
No, the budget process is a several-month-long process, and in June we're required to pass the budget, which we did on the Thursday meeting in June. So there was one tax increase of 2 cents, and that's when that Thursday night when we passed the budget, that's when we did that one tax increase. Everything else before was an attempt to get this into the conversation so the public would know.
Well, that's not true.
Thinking.
There were 2 different tax increase votes.
Well, what I'm saying is up until you adopt the budget in June, it's a draft budget. You say,
right.
Okay, we want to propose
but
this.
But you voted to direct the city manager to increase taxes to balance the budget by 1 cent, and you came back weeks later and instructed her to add another 1 cent. So those were 2 separate tax increase votes.
Into the draft budget, but you don't actually adopt that.
Well, of course.
Until,
I mean, at the end, then you have to accept the budget with the revenues in it, but the city council was directing how the budget was going to be balanced, either by cutting costs or by increasing taxes, and you guys voted twice to increase taxes.
And I'll be glad to talk about both those pennies.
Let me ask you more about the process again, because I'm somewhat confused that there was a decision made, voted down to go and talk to the department heads and have them bring their needs to you and discuss it one-on-one, and now you're saying that we ended up having to make a quick decision on whether we're going to increase taxes or not in one night. That's confusing to me. Secondly, the other thing that you've been highly criticized for, and I think this is a reasonable criticism, for years you complained that there were votes being taken and things being put on the agenda that had not been discussed with other city council people prior to that meeting. You've been the most vehement council person in arguing against that. But then you end up on that first night that the first tax increase vote was taken. You actually have a city council person that wasn't even at the meeting. Candy Smith was not at the meeting. There was no tax increase discussion on the agenda for that meeting. You voted to put it on the agenda and voted a tax increase that night. You had one of the city council people that wasn't even at the meeting. How do you explain your philosophies prior to you having the 4 votes and then the change in attitude where you're going to, okay, I got 4 votes, so I'm going to do what I want to do. And one of the city council people's not even here. We're going to vote to increase taxes tonight. She thinks, Candy Smith thinks that was a disrespect to her and to the people of her district, and I happen to agree with her. How do you explain that?
Well, in the 2012 budget process, a majority of the city council voted on the very last night of the budget, where we adopt the budget. That's when you officially adopt the budget in that second meeting in June. Voted a pay raise for the mayor and the city council, and I voted against that. There had been no discussion about that earlier. So what I was trying to do, what some of us was trying to do in this budget process, in May, if we're thinking about a tax rate adjustment, get it into the draft budget, get it out there so that we can have conversation about it. And
didn't you, in essence, do the same thing that you complained that they had done on that
No,
issue?
this was
how is it different?
Well, this was in May that we're putting this into the draft budget, and the budget is not adopted until June. And so there's plenty of time
Kevin,
for conversation.
you're splitting hairs. I mean, once a tax increase vote is taken by the council and it passes, it's going into the budget. I mean, I know that it's a formality then that at the end of the period of time when everything is in there, then another vote is taken to pass the budget. But my question really deals with something as important as a tax increase not being on the agenda, but being discussed in one meeting, voted on at the same meeting, and not having one of the city council people even there to give her point of view.
Well, this was a regularly scheduled meeting, and obviously I'm sorry that not everyone could be there. But again, the goal for the public is to get any consideration that we're thinking about a tax rate, to get it into the draft budget so there can be conversation.
Right.
The last thing I want to do would be to do something like that at the very last minute, like they did with the city council pay raise, which I was just and along with many other citizens, outraged about. So,
well, I mean, there are a lot of people outraged that there was a vote to raise taxes, and all the city council people weren't there to discuss it. I mean, again, it seems like you're outraged about something that's on your agenda, but not something on somebody else's agenda.
Well, again, that was in a draft budget, which we had a meeting in June, 2 meetings in June. There was plenty of time to reverse that if there was the votes on the council to do that.
The other thing that's happened since that time is the fact that you've got this gentleman, Terry Boardman, who is a CPA, who has said from the beginning he didn't think that there was a vote that raising taxes was not necessary. Mm-hmm. He's dug into the budget, found some things, including what has been called a vehicle replacement fund. There's also been an equipment or a facilities fund that's been building that you took money aside, and set it aside for facilities maintenance, which I know was something that's been discussed for years. But all of this is essentially what's happening is you got money going into these funds out of the general budget into these internal funds for future purchases that might take place 3, 4, 5 years down the road for facilities maintenance and for vehicles. And there's some question about whether you should have done that or not. And then the mayor came out and said that he agrees that it was not necessary to raise taxes 2 cents. So I want you to give your response
well,
to that.
there's several pieces in there. As far as what the mayor said, again, no one who spoke or voted against that tax rate adjustment came up with a specific plan of how to balance the budget that night. So I don't know what to say about that. In hindsight, it's easy. When you make a tough call, it's easy to come out and say, no taxes or whatever. But again, you got to balance the budget. In that June meeting. With regard to, you mentioned the vehicle replacement fund. I'm glad to talk about that. This was a fund that Wayne Bowers, former city manager Wayne Bowers, brought to the council an idea, and Bryant Kittrell and I both were strong supporters of that. And I think the whole council went along with it, but strong supporters of that as best practice, fiscally prudent way to approach. Basically, if you got a $30,000 vehicle that will last 10 years, that department has to put in $3,000 a year. Now, a citizen was telling me yesterday that they remember a time when the rescue chief came up and said, we really need a new ambulance. It's broken. It stays in the shop a lot. And the council looked around and said, this is a great idea, but we don't have the money. Well, this vehicle replacement fund, which I'm a strong advocate for, and not going in and compromising it, we will not have that kind of situation. We have a rational formula and a rational plan for replacing our vehicles when they wear out. And so,
but there's over $7 million in there. The question is that a reasonable amount of money to have sitting on the sidelines when you're raising taxes?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I'll respond to that. First of all, this might surprise, I don't know if you've seen this in the 60-plus emails, right? But the value of the rolling stock of this city is $36 million. And so 7.2 million, I think, was the number that Boardman is using numbers that's a year old, 2013 audit. The number now, I think, is down maybe a couple of million. We bought last month a rescue truck, and I think next month we have to buy one. $1.5 million. Now, why rescue trucks cost that much? But this fund is again, there's a reason why the fund is where it's at, and it's not it's not just packing money away. Let me mention another very important point. This seems a little bit technical. The sanitation department and the stormwater program, both of which are enterprise funds, which means they need to operate, get enough income to pay their expenses. Both those, unless I'm badly mistaken, funnel their vehicles through the vehicle replacement fund. Now, we can't go charge sanitation fees to citizens and then go rob those fees to go do something else in the general fund. That wouldn't be honest, right? But so that vehicle replacement fund is not just free money that we can use, in my view.
All right, I don't want to run out of time. On the table now, the tax increase has been put in. People's taxes are going to go up, and now you're talking about nothing still has really been done to address the condition of the city streets. Now you got to go in and you got to have a bond referendum, and you got a bond committee that's looking at that. Did it cross your mind that people are going? There's a limit to what people are going to accept? I mean, if you put this to the vote of the people after you've just raised their taxes 2 cents, aren't you concerned that people are not going to favor a bond referendum that's going to increase their taxes again? I mean, there's been money set aside. You're talking about this vehicle replacement fund, facilities maintenance fund. There's also been money set aside for roads. There was a $4 million fund sitting there that hadn't even been spent yet. And so, people get confused by all that, Calvin. And I think that what you've done is put the bond in real question as to whether people will support it or not.
Well, there's 2 or 3 pieces to that. One is I didn't raise the idea of a bond. That was I try to be cooperative, and I went along with it.
So you think you should just raise taxes?
No, I don't think I went along with exploring the idea of a bond. My specific contribution was making sure we put together a broad-based citizen committee. I appointed Kelly Barnhill, respected businessman, T. Steinberg, who is manager of the main office of BB&T on Greenville Boulevard, successful business people that joined with others to give us feedback on that. That's what I wanted. I am absolutely convinced that we shouldn't use a nickel of bond money to get us out of to handle our annual operating budget. We need to step up to the plate and fix that without bond money.
But you got to do it. You got to raise taxes again to do it. You don't have the money to do it.
Well, this is feedback the bond committee can give us, and we've got some good people.
But basically, what you're saying is it should be left up to the council, not to the voters. No.
Well,
If you don't want a bond referendum, you're saying we need to do whatever we got to do. You'll have to raise taxes again to fix the road.
I didn't say I didn't want a bond. I'm saying I want this committee to give us their best advice
Right.
about this. I'm open to
Okay.
exploring the question.
We're almost out of time. I'll give you the last word on this, Bill O'Reilly style.
Yeah.
Last word, Calvin.
Last word is
What's the last word
the
on
last word is
people's
we've got
taxes being raised?
the last word. Well, this is relates. We've got two new council members. Rick Croskery is former chair of the Chamber of Commerce and a leader in one of the biggest businesses, medical businesses in town, right across the street here. Rick Croskery, who ran a business that was a commercial renovation business that did a lot of renovations uptown, is now on the money side, works on the money issues at ECU. So we've got thoughtful people at the table. They're people who think long-term, not just what's in politically advantageous today. They reach out to other council members. I like all of those qualities and characteristics, and I really think that we've got some tough issues, but I think we've got good people at the table working on them.
Thank you, Calvin. Good to see you.
Thank you, Henry.
Calvin
Always
Mercer.
good to see you.
And McGee was right. He said, you want me to do sports now because you're not going to have time at the end because you'll go so long with Calvin. He was right. And we're out of time. And thanks, Calvin, for being here this morning. The debate will continue.